The night Lily Shen was supposed to become the property of the most powerful man in San Francisco, she set fire to her own wedding veil and climbed out a second-story window into a storm that would change everything. She had no money, no plan, and no idea that the man she was running toward, without knowing it, was sitting in a jail cell 200 miles east, wrongfully accused of murder, waiting for someone brave enough to tell the truth. Two broken people, two impossible situations, one collision that neither of them would survive unchanged. If you want to see how far a woman will go when the only other option is to disappear, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came sideways off the bay, driving hard enough to rattle the tall windows of the Shen house on Nob Hill, and Lily stood before the mirror in her wedding dress with her hands pressed flat against her stomach, trying to breathe. The dress was ivory silk imported from Leon, with a bodice embroidered in seed pearls that her father's business partner, Aldrich Vane, had selected personally. He had presented it to her 2 weeks ago in the front parlor, holding it out with the same proprietary satisfaction a man might show when displaying a new piece of furniture he had acquired at considerable expense. "It suits you," he had said, not to her, but to her Uncle Edmund, who stood beside him, nodding with the vigorous enthusiasm of a man who understood exactly what he was being paid. Lily had said nothing. She had learned in the 8 months since her father's death that silence was the only currency she had left. She was 22 years old. She had grown up in this house, the only child of James Shen, a merchant who had come to San Francisco from Canton at 19 with nothing but intelligence and stubbornness, and had over 30 years built one of the most respected import businesses on the Pacific coast. Her mother had died when Lily was 7. Her father had raised her on books and ledgers and the conviction that a sharp mind was the only tool worth sharpening. "You are going to be remarkable," he had told her over and over, in the way fathers say things they mean absolutely. "Whatever you choose to become." He had died of fever in March, and everything he had built had collapsed in the months that followed. Not because the business had failed, it had not yet, but because the debts he had been managing quietly for years had all come due at once, and the man to whom most of those debts were owed was Aldrich Vane. Aldrich Vane, who was 51 years old, who sat on the city council, who had buried one wife and dismissed the topic with the brisk efficiency of a man closing an unprofitable account, who had looked at Lily across her father's grave and said in a voice so reasonable it made her skin crawl that he was prepared to forgive the entire debt in exchange for a marriage that would benefit both parties. "Both parties," Lily had repeated. "You receive security," he had explained with patient condescension. "I receive a wife of suitable background, and I must say considerable personal appeal." Uncle Edmund had shaken her arm that night when she tried to refuse. Not hard, just enough to remind her of what she already knew. "There is no money," he said in his careful way. "The house, the business, everything, it all reverts to Vane if the debt is not settled. We will have nothing. You will have nothing. This is the only solution." She had spent 8 months trying to find another one. Now standing in the Lion silk with the rain hammering against the glass and the guests assembling 2 floors below, Lily had to admit that she had failed. Every bank she had approached had turned her away. Every business contact of her father's had expressed sympathy and declined to help. The law firm her father had trusted had quietly transferred its loyalties to Vane. The city had turned out arranged itself around men like Aldrich Vane the way water arranged itself around the stone, smoothly, naturally, with no visible effort. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and looked at the street below. Carriages were arriving. Gas lamps threw wet circles of gold on the cobblestones. Inside those carriages were the most important people in San Francisco come to witness Lily Shen become Mrs. Aldrich Vane. She looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked expensive and immovable, which was, she supposed, exactly what Vane had paid for. Her father's voice rose up in her memory unbidden. "Whatever you choose to become." The word choose landed in her chest like a coal. She turned away from the window. She crossed to the vanity where the wedding veil lay draped over the back of the chair, French lace, an illusion netting the kind of thing that cost more than most people earned in a year. She picked it up. She held it for a moment, feeling its impossible lightness and the way it seemed to weigh nothing at all. Then she crossed to the fireplace and dropped it in. The lace caught immediately, curling and blackening the illusion netting, going up in a sheet of pale flame. She watched it burn for exactly 3 seconds, enough to be certain she could not take it back, and then she moved. She had been planning this for 6 days. Not in detail, not with any real certainty that she would go through with it, but she had been planning nonetheless, the way a person in a burning building plans even when they are not sure the window will hold. She stripped off the ivory silk. She pulled on the dark wool traveling dress she had hidden under the winter coats in her wardrobe 3 days ago. She took the small leather satchel from behind the hat boxes on the top shelf. Inside, $43 in coin, her father's pocket watch, a photograph of the two of them taken on the occasion of her 18th birthday, and a letter. The letter was addressed to her. It had arrived the previous Thursday, forwarded through 3 separate addresses, and it had taken her 2 days to understand what it meant. Miss Shen, I knew your father. He trusted me with certain information regarding Aldrich Vane's business dealings. Information that, if properly documented and presented, would be sufficient to expose Vane for the criminal he is. Your father was afraid to use it while he lived. He is gone now. I am not in a position to act alone. If you are willing to be brave, come east. Find me in Garnet Crossing, Wyoming territory. Ask for the man called Hargrove. I will explain everything when you arrive. Destroy this letter after reading. A friend. She had not destroyed the letter. She had memorized it, which was better. She pulled the satchel over her shoulder. She went to the window. Second floor, a drop of perhaps 12 feet to the kitchen garden below, and from there through the gate into the alley where the night was howling with rain and possibility. She climbed out. The drop was harder than she had calculated. She landed badly, one ankle turning on the wet stone, and for a moment she just crouched there in the mud and the rain with her heart slamming against her ribs, listening for shouts from above. A door slammed somewhere inside the house. Voices. She could not tell if they had seen her or were simply the ordinary chaos of a wedding in progress. She did not wait to find out. She went through the gate at a run, turned left into the alley, and kept moving. San Francisco in November was cold and wet and merciless, and Lily had never been more grateful for anything in her life. She ran until the Nob Hill neighborhood gave way to the steeper, narrower streets of the commercial district. The rain plastered her hair against her face and soaked through her traveling dress inside of a minute. She had no hat, no cloak, no luggage beyond the satchel. She had $43, a pocket watch, a photograph, and a letter she had already memorized. She had a name, Hargrove. Garnet Crossing, Wyoming territory. She had no idea who he was. She had no idea if the letter was a trap. She had no idea if she could make it to Wyoming in November with $43 and no contacts, and a man like Aldrich Vane surely gathering his considerable resources to find her the moment someone noticed the burning veil in the empty room. She stopped at the corner of Market Street, pressed herself into the shallow overhang of a doorway, and tried to think. The Transcontinental Railroad. That was the only realistic route. The Central Pacific ran east out of Oakland. She would need to get across the bay first, then find a connecting line that could take her toward Wyoming. She had enough money for a ticket, maybe if she was careful, if she did not waste anything. A cable car rattled past empty in the rain. The driver looked at her, a young woman standing alone on Market Street at 9 o'clock at night, soaked through, no hat, no escort, and the judgment in his expression was so reflexive and complete that it was almost impressive. Lily squared her shoulders and started walking toward the ferry building. The bay crossing took 40 minutes. She stood at the railing in the rain because the indoor cabin was full of men who watched her with the focused attention she had learned to identify as the prelude to something unpleasant, and she preferred the cold and the wet to whatever they were contemplating. In Oakland, she found the train station and a conductor who was either very kind or very tired and sold her a second-class ticket to Sacramento without asking why a young woman was traveling alone in the rain at 10 o'clock at night. From Sacramento, she would need to find a connection east. She slept on the train with her satchel in her lap and her back against the wall, and one eye open, which was not sleep at all really, but a reasonable facsimile. By morning, she was in Sacramento with $31 and a headache and the first real understanding of what she had done. She had burned her wedding veil and climbed out a window and left behind everything she had ever known. She had no home to return to. The house on Nob Hill belonged to Vane now by debt, if not yet by law. She had no family who would take her in. Uncle Edmund had made his choice the night he shook her arm. She had no friends with enough standing to help her against a man like Vane. What she had was a name and a direction. Hargrove, Garnet Crossing. She bought a bowl of porridge at the station restaurant and studied the rail map posted on the wall. Wyoming territory. She found it with her finger an enormous patch of geography between Utah and the Dakotas, full of mountains and rivers and almost entirely empty of the kind of civilization she had spent her whole life in. The best route would take her through Utah and into Cheyenne, then north by stage or freight wagon into the interior. She could make it in a week, maybe less, if the weather held. The weather did not hold. The first 3 days on the train were unremarkable in the way that genuine misery is unremarkable, constant, monotonous, and all-encompassing. The second-class car smelled like coal smoke and wet wool, and the particular desperation of people going somewhere they were not sure they wanted to go. The seats were wooden benches that got harder with every passing hour. The food sold at station stops was expensive and terrible. Lily ate as little as possible and spent her waking hours watching the landscape change outside the window. The flatlands of the Central Valley giving way to the Nevada desert, the desert giving way to the surprising lift of the Wasatch Range in Utah, mountains appearing and growing and becoming real in a way that maps had never suggested. She had traveled before with her father, Shanghai once when she was 12, Portland twice for business, but those journeys had been cushioned by money and purpose and her father's steady presence beside her. This was different. On the fourth day outside of a small Utah town, whose name she did not catch, a man sat down beside her who had not been on the train before the last stop. He was perhaps 40 with a face that looked like it had been lived in hard. He was well dressed in a way that suggested he wanted people to think he was prosperous, rather than actually being so. He had a silver watch chain and hands that did not match it, working hands scarred at the knuckles. The hands of a man who had been many things before deciding to present himself as whatever he was now. "Traveling far?" he asked. "Wyoming," Lily said without looking away from the window. "Business or pleasure? Personal." Alone. A pause she did not like. "Brave of you. Territory can be rough on women traveling solo. A man could worry." "Then it is fortunate," Lily said, finally turning to look at him with the direct, flat stare her father had taught her to use in negotiations, "that you are not the man responsible for my safety." He blinked. Then he laughed a sound that was either genuine amusement or something that had decided to present itself as amusement. "Fair enough," he said, and moved 2 rows forward. She watched the back of his head for the next 4 hours. He got off in Ogden without looking back at her, and she let herself breathe again. In Cheyenne, she had $19 left and needed to find transportation north. The stage line that ran toward the interior of Wyoming territory operated on a schedule that might generously be described as approximate twice-a-week weather permitting. The ticket agent told her with the expression of a man who had stopped apologizing for this long ago. "When is the next one?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if the weather permits." The weather in Cheyenne in November had complicated opinions about what it would permit. She spent the night in a boarding house 2 blocks from the station. The room cost $3, which was highway robbery, and the lock on the door required lifting the handle at a specific angle while turning the key, a procedure she mastered after 20 minutes of practice. She lay in the narrow bed and thought about Garnet Crossing, which she could not find on any map she had been able to examine. She thought about the letter, which she had now read so many times she could have written it backward. She thought about Hargrove, a surname probably, or a nickname, and what kind of man received visitors by that name in a Wyoming mining town, and whether the phrase "a friend" in the letter's closing was genuinely reassuring or the opposite. She thought about Aldrich Vane, who by now had certainly discovered what she had done. She thought about the investigators he would hire, the connections he would activate, the patience that men like him exercised when they had been publicly embarrassed. She thought about her father, who had known something about Vane, something significant enough to pass along to a stranger with enough confidence to send a letter to his daughter asking her to be brave. "What did you know, Papa?" she thought. "And why did you not tell me?" The stage left at 8 in the morning, and by some miracle the weather permitted it. The road north was 2 days of bone-rattling misery across high plains country that looked under the low November sky like the surface of the moon. The stage held 6 passengers. Lily, a hardware merchant named Dawson, who talked for the first 6 hours and then mercifully fell asleep, 2 brothers, who appeared to be returning from something they did not discuss, a minister with anxious eyes, and a woman named Cora, who was perhaps 35 and who looked at Lily with the frank, appraising intelligence of someone who had also at some point made a choice that burned things behind her. First time in the territory, Cora asked somewhere around the third hour. Is it that obvious? The way you are looking at the landscape, like you are trying to decide whether it is beautiful or terrifying. Lily considered the high plains rolling past the window, the vast emptiness of it, the sky that seemed to exist on an entirely different scale than any sky she had known, the occasional eruption of rock formations that appeared without warning and disappeared just as suddenly. Both, she said. Cora smiled. That is the right answer. People who only see beautiful last about 6 months. People who only see terrifying last less. How long have you been here? 8 years. A pause. Long enough to stop looking at it and just live in it. They did not speak again until the stage stopped for the night at a way station, but something had been established between them, a recognition or an understanding, or simply the acknowledgement that they were two women in a place that had not arranged itself for their convenience. Garnet Crossing appeared the following afternoon, arriving without any announcement except a scattered collection of buildings in a valley between two ridges, the kind of settlement that looked like it had accumulated rather than been planned. A main street of sorts, a dozen structures, smoke rising from chimneys. The mine operation was visible from the road, a timber head frame against the ridge to the east, a scattering of smaller buildings clustered around it like satellites. The stage stopped in front of the largest building, which bore a sign reading Harlow's General Store and Provisions in sun-faded paint. Lily climbed down with her satchel and looked at Garnet Crossing, Wyoming territory, which was nothing like San Francisco in every way she could immediately identify. You are meeting someone, Cora asked from behind her. I'm looking for a man called Hargrove. Something changed in Cora's expression. Not fear exactly, something more complicated. You had better come inside first, she said. There are things you need to know before you ask that question out loud. The general store smelled like sawdust and coffee, and the particular combination of dozens of things stored together in a small space. The man behind the counter, Harlow, presumably a heavy-set man with an apron and a face built for practical use rather than aesthetic appeal, looked at Lily with the same assessment the stage conductor had applied in Sacramento, but with different contents. Help you, passing through, Cora said smoothly before Lily could speak. My friend needs a hot meal and somewhere to rest. She steered Lily toward the back of the store with a firm hand on her elbow. In the cramped back room used for storage between sacks of flour and coils of rope, Cora turned to face her. Cole Hargrove has been in the Garnet Crossing jail for 3 weeks, she said without preamble. He is charged with the murder of a man named Dex Whitmore. The trial is set for next Tuesday, and unless something changes in the next 6 days, he is going to hang. Lily felt the world shift slightly under her feet. Murder, she repeated. He did not do it. Cora's voice was flat, certain. I know Cole. He has been an agent for the Pinkerton agency for 7 years, working to expose the mining cartel that owns half this territory, including the mine outside this town. Whitmore was one of their men. Someone killed Whitmore and arranged the evidence to point at Cole. Someone, Lily said. Someone with enough money and influence to make it stick. Cora studied her. The kind of man who might want a Pinkerton agent who knows too much to disappear quietly before he can testify. The letter in Lily's satchel, her father's name, Aldrich Vane. My father, Lily said slowly. He died 8 months ago, fever, they said, but he knew something about Vane's business dealings. He had been corresponding with someone about it. A Pinkerton agent. Cora was very still. Your father's name, James Shen, San Francisco. Something moved through Cora's face, recognition, grief, and something harder underneath both. James Shen, she said softly, was the one who found the documentation. He sent it to Cole 8 months ago. Cole was building the case. If Whitmore had not been killed, if Cole had not been arrested. She stopped. Vane's people have been looking for that documentation ever since. If Cole hangs, the evidence disappears with him. Everything your father risked is gone. Lily thought of her father at his desk in the house on Nob Hill, surrounded by his ledgers, careful and methodical, building his case in silence. She thought of Aldrich Vane accepting a cup of tea in their front parlor, his manner so reasonable, so certain of his own impunity. She thought of the letter. Come east. Be brave. 6 days, she said. 6 days, Cora confirmed. Lily set her satchel down on a sack of flour and looked at the woman in front of her. Tell me everything. The story came out in pieces over the next hour in Cora's careful, precise voice, while outside the window the light failed and the temperature dropped and Garnet Crossing settled into its evening rhythms. Cole Hargrove was 34 years old, had been a Pinkerton operative for 7 years, and had been sent to Wyoming Territory to investigate a network of mining fraud and labor exploitation that stretched from the Wyoming interior all the way to investors in New York, and through a series of carefully obscured financial arrangements to certain business interests in San Francisco. Her father's import business had been one of several legitimate enterprises used to launder money through the cartel system. James Shen had discovered this, had been horrified, had reached out to the Pinkerton agency through channels that had eventually led to Cole Hargrove. The correspondence between James Shen and Cole had been extensive. The documentation her father had compiled was meticulous. "Where is it now?" Lily asked. "The documentation." "Cole hid it before he was arrested." A pause. "He is the only one who knows where." "Then we need to talk to him." "The sheriff will not allow visitors. He is under pressure. The mine operator Dexter Holt is the most powerful man in this valley. Holt is also Vane's primary partner in the territory. The sheriff does what Holt tells him." "Everyone has pressure," Lily said, and was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "The question is what is applying it and whether it can be redirected." Cora looked at her for a long moment. "Your father said you were like him," she said finally. "I see what he meant." The jail was a single stone building on the north end of the main street, solid and unpretentious. The deputy on duty was a young man named Garber, who had the look of someone who had taken a job he was not entirely sure he wanted and had not yet worked out how to leave. Lily had spent an hour in Cora's room above the boarding house. Cora ran it, having come to Garnet Crossing 2 years ago, and built herself a quiet life here, deciding exactly what to say and how to say it. She presented herself at the jail door at 7 o'clock in the evening, with a basket containing 2 bottles of rye whiskey, a pound of Cora's best coffee, and the precise expression her father had worn when entering negotiations he intended to win. "Deputy Garber," she said, "I am a legal researcher from San Francisco. I have been retained by the Hargrove family to review documentation in the matter of the territory of Wyoming versus Cole Hargrove. I need 15 minutes with the prisoner." Garber looked at the basket. He looked at Lily. He looked at the basket again. "Legal researcher," he repeated. "The family is prepared to be generous with those who assist in ensuring a fair proceeding." She set the basket on his desk with a small, definitive sound. "15 minutes is all I require." Garber studied the basket for another moment. "15 minutes," he said. "I will be right outside." The cell was in the back of the building, separated from the main office by a door in a hallway that smelled like cold stone. Cole Hargrove was sitting on the edge of his bunk when the deputy let her in, and he looked up with the expression of a man who had learned to be careful about what he let his face show. He was not what she had expected, though she had not been sure what she expected. He was lean and dark-haired with the quality of stillness that she would later learn to recognize as something he had developed deliberately, a Pinkerton operative's skill, the ability to occupy space quietly enough that people forgot to be guarded around him. He had a bruise along his jaw that was fading from purple to yellow, 3 weeks old by the look of it. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. "You are James Shen's daughter, Witzum," he said finally. "Not a question." "Lily Shen." She sat down on the single chair across from the bunk. "I got your letter." "I sent that letter expecting a reply, not a visitor." "A reply would have been intercepted." She looked at him steadily. "And I had reasons of my own for leaving San Francisco." "Vane. He was going to be my husband." A pause. "As of 4 days ago, he is not." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one, a recognition of the particular quality of a decision that could not be undone. "You burned your bridges," he said. "I burned my wedding veil," she corrected. "And then the bridges burned themselves." For the first time, Cole Hargrove looked at her as though he was seeing her clearly. "The trial is Tuesday," he said. "I know. 6 days." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me where the documentation is. Tell me what I need to know to build your defense. I have a copy of my father's personal records, his ledgers, his correspondence. I have been managing his accounts since he died, and I know every transaction, every document, every anomaly. I know Aldrich Vane's money and how it moves and where it comes from." That information is enough to put Vane in prison, Cole said carefully, and Dexter Holt with him, which is why they need me to hang before this goes to trial. Then let us make sure we are both alive and free to see that happen. She met his eyes without flinching. Where is the documentation? Outside in the hallway, Deputy Garber was working his way through the rye whiskey and thinking about how cold it was getting. Inside the cells, two people who had come to this moment from entirely different directions sat in the lamplight and began carefully and urgently to figure out how to save each other. Cole studied her for a moment longer, as if testing the weight of what she had said. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice dropping to just above a whisper. 3 miles north of town, he said, there is a dry creek bed that runs along the base of the eastern ridge. Where it bends, there is a flat-top boulder with a natural cavity underneath. The documentation is wrapped in oilskin inside that cavity. Your father's letters, the financial records, my own reports to the agency, everything. I can get there tonight. You cannot go alone. Holt has men watching the roads. Then I will not use the roads. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his expression that was harder to read than anything before, not skepticism exactly, but a careful provisional assessment, the kind a man gives when he is trying to determine whether to trust something precious to someone he has just met. There is something else, he said. Tell me. Whitmore, the man I am accused of killing, was not just a cartel enforcer. He was preparing to turn evidence against Holt. Someone in the cartel found out. Someone had him killed and arranged for the evidence to land on me. He met her eyes. I have a theory about who, but I need to be out of this cell to prove it. One problem at a time, Lily said. First the documentation, then your defense, then Vane and Holt. He almost smiled. It made him look younger briefly, and then the weight came back. You said your father's fever, he said quietly. You believe it was natural? The question landed in a space she had not let herself examine too closely. I believed it at the time, she said. Now I am less certain. I am sorry. He said it without ceremony, the way people say things they mean too much to dress up. He was a good man, brave in the way that quiet people are brave, doing the right thing without anyone watching. Lily felt something press against the back of her eyes. She did not let it go further. Yes, she said, he was. She stood, she straightened her jacket, she picked up her satchel. I will have the documentation by morning, she said. Be ready. Deputy Garber was on his second bottle when she came back through the office. She thanked him pleasantly, retrieved the remainder of the coffee, and walked out into the Wyoming night, where the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees and the stars burned with the particular intensity that came from air, with nothing between them and the eye. She had 6 days. She started walking north. The creek bed was exactly where Cole had described it, a pale scar of gravel, winding along the base of the eastern ridge, visible in the moonlight as a slightly different texture against the dark ground. Lily found it by moving straight north from the edge of town, staying off the road, as Cole had warned, threading through stands of pine and frozen sage that grabbed at her skirts and turned the 3 miles into something considerably longer than 3 miles. She was not accustomed to this kind of travel. The Sacramento Delta and the streets of Nob Hill had not prepared her for terrain that had no interest in being navigated, that pushed back and shifted underfoot, and offered no landmarks beyond the ridge against the sky and the stars overhead, and the increasingly certain conviction that she had gone the wrong direction. She had not gone the wrong direction. She found the flat-top boulder 40 minutes after leaving the jail, crouching at the bend in the creek bed, exactly as Cole had described, a pale granite shape that stood out from the surrounding rock in the moonlight. She felt along the base until her fingers found the cavity, a natural hollow, perhaps 2 feet wide and 18 inches deep, sheltered from rain by the overhang above. The oilskin package was still there. She pulled it out and held it for a moment, in the cold, feeling its weight, trying to understand what she was holding. Her father's letters. His careful, methodical documentation of everything he had found. The evidence that had gotten him killed, she was more certain of that now than she had been in Cole's cell, though she still could not say how she knew, and that someone on 2 fronts was desperate to destroy. She put it in her satchel alongside her father's pocket watch and his photograph, and she started back toward town. She was 100 yards from the edge of the settlement when she heard the horses. 2 riders coming from the direction of the mine. She stepped back into the shadow of the tree line and stood absolutely still the way she had seen deer stand when something moved nearby and she waited. The riders passed within 20 feet of her. They were moving quickly, heads down, apparently not looking for anything along the tree line. She heard them speaking in low voices as they passed fragments of conversation that the wind carried away before she could assemble them into meaning. Then they were gone toward the south road, and Lily stood in the trees for another 5 minutes before she trusted herself to move. Back in Cora's boarding house in the small back room Cora had set aside for her, she unwrapped the oilskin package on the narrow table and spent the rest of the night reading. Her father's handwriting was so familiar, it made her chest ache, the particular forward slant of his letters, the way he always wrote figures in columns, even in the middle of sentences, the precise, unhurried quality of a man who believed that accuracy was a form of respect. The documentation was comprehensive. Transaction records, correspondence between Vane's San Francisco office and Dexter Holt's mining operation in Wyoming. Entries in her father's ledgers that she now understood differently than she had when she kept the accounts after his death. Not anomalies she now saw, but careful disguised records of money moving through the Shen import business that had come from places it should not have come from and gone to places that should not have received it. Her father had not been complicit. That was the first thing she established, reading carefully and taking notes in her own hand. He had discovered what was being done through his business without his knowledge, and he had begun documenting it. The documentation was thorough enough to be damning, but he had clearly been afraid to act on it alone. She understood why. Against a man like Vane, with his city council connections and his network of lawyers and his comfortable certainty that the world arranged itself for his benefit, a lone merchant with evidence of financial misconduct was not an immovable force. He was a problem to be managed, a fever in March. She set the thought aside. She could not afford grief right now. Cole's own reports to the Pinkerton agency were written in a different style, compressed, precise, almost telegraphic, the notes of a man trained to record information without editorializing. They built a detailed picture of the cartel's operations, the mine in Garnet Crossing, which was producing substantially more gold than Holt reported to his investors, the mechanism by which the unreported ore was converted to cash, the network of shell companies and legitimate businesses through which that cash moved eastward, and the investors at the top of the structure in New York and San Francisco who received the returns without necessarily knowing the details of how they were generated. Aldrich Vane was named in 4 separate places. At the bottom of the stack, she found something she had not expected, a separate document in Cole's handwriting that appeared to be a partial account of the night Dex Whitmore died. She read it twice. In the morning, she went back to the jail. Deputy Garber was on duty again, looking like a man who had not slept well and was nursing a consequence. He looked at Lily with the resigned expression of someone who understood that she was going to find a way in, regardless of what he said, and he let her in. Cole looked like he had not slept either. He was sitting on the floor, this time back against the wall, and he looked up when she came in with an expression that was carefully controlled, except for the slight tensing of his jaw. "You found it?" he said. "I found it." She sat down. "I also read everything, including your account of the night Whitmore died." Something shifted in his face. "I did not kill him," he said. "I know that. Your account is consistent with everything else in the documentation." She met his eyes. "You were at the mine that night because you had arranged to meet Whitmore. He had agreed to provide testimony. Someone else knew about the meeting. Someone in the cartel. Or someone who was watching Whitmore. The document you wrote, it says you found him already dead when you arrived. And that you found something else." A pause. "A pocket watch," Cole said. "On the ground near the body. It was not Whitmore's. I recognized it. I had seen it before on someone else." "On who? The sheriff?" His voice was flat. "His name is Russ Cowell. He has been Holt's man for 3 years. Everyone in the valley knows it, but knowing and proving are different things. That watch was his. I recognized the engraving, his initials on the case. He must have lost it during the struggle. He killed Whitmore himself, and then he arrested me for it." Lily was very still. "If that watch can be produced as evidence," she said carefully. "I do not have it. I dropped it when Cowell's deputies arrived. I did not have time to take it. For all I know, he has already recovered it. Or it is still there. 3 weeks is a long time in an abandoned mine site. It could have been buried or kicked aside." If someone who was not obviously looking for it happened to examine the area, it is dangerous, Cole said. If Cowell suspects we are building a case, he will move against you. I suspect you have been in this cell for 3 weeks and have developed some difficulty calibrating what I am and am not capable of, Lily said. Cole looked at her for a moment. That is fair, he said. Tell me exactly where you were when you found the watch. The location was a specific section of the mine's lower level, the area near the equipment storage where Whitmore's body had been found. Cole described it in the same compressed, precise way he had written his reports, giving her landmarks she could use to orient herself even in low light. The trial is in 5 days, Lily said. I need to find the watch. I need to get the documentation to someone who can authenticate it and submit it as evidence. I need a lawyer who is not on Holt's payroll. The nearest lawyer not on Holt's payroll is in Rawlins, 3 days by stage. Then I need to send a telegraph. She thought for a moment. The telegraph operator is he Holt's man. Not directly. He owes Holt money, which amounts to the same thing. Not always, Lily said. Debt is one form of obligation. There are others. She stood. I will come back tonight. You should not come back at all, Cole said. Cowell will notice. He is not a smart man, but he is a watchful one, and he already knows you arrived in town and asked after me. I will be careful. Being careful is not the same as being safe. No, she agreed, but it is a start. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. Miss Shen. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she could not entirely read, something complicated and carefully held. Your father was right about you, he said. When he wrote about you, he said he stopped, started again. He was proud of you. He talked about you the way people talk about something that matters more than they know how to say. Lily stood very still. Thank you, she said after a moment. That is, thank you. She left before the thing pressing against the back of her eyes could win. Cora was waiting in the boarding house kitchen with coffee and the particular expression of a woman who had spent the night deciding how much to say. Cowell was at the mine this morning, she said as Lily sat down. 2 of Holt's men with him. They were in the lower level for about an hour. Lily set down her coffee cup. Before dawn, I have a room that overlooks the eastern road. I saw them ride out. And I have a guest who works the mine who told me what direction they went when they got there. Cora's voice was even careful. If they were looking for something they wanted to recover before the trial, they may have found it, Lily said. Or they may have found nothing, which would mean it is still there. Which means you are going to go look. Someone needs to. Cora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I will go with you. You should not be involved in this. If it goes wrong, I am already involved. I have been involved since Cole came to this valley, and I decided to help him. Cora's voice was flat and certain. I know these mountains. I know which approaches Holt's men do not watch because they think no one uses them. You need me. Lily looked at her across the table. Yes, she said. I do. They went that afternoon during the hours when the mine was running at full operation and Holt's attention would be on production, not security. Cora knew a route that came down from the ridge to the north and entered the mine property from an angle that avoided the main road and the guard post at the primary entrance. The mine itself was larger than it appeared from the road, a collection of buildings surrounding the primary shaft with secondary tunnels running into the ridge from 3 different points. The lower level Cole had described was accessed through the 3rd tunnel, the oldest one which had been partially decommissioned and was no longer in regular use. It was accordingly not well watched. They found the equipment storage area without difficulty. The space Cole had described the area near the old ore cart tracks, where the natural rock formation created a sheltered corner, was exactly as he had specified. Lily searched it carefully, working in the thin gray light that filtered from the tunnel entrance, moving slowly and methodically, covering every inch of ground within a 10-foot radius of where Cole had said he was standing when he found the body. She found the watch wedged between 2 pieces of fallen timber, pushed back into a shadow gap where it would have been invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. She held it in her palm, silver case slightly tarnished. She opened it. Inside the cover, an engraving RC with purpose. RC Russ Cowell. She closed it and put it in her satchel alongside the oilskin package, alongside her father's pocket watch, and his photograph in the letter that had started all of this. Got it, Cora asked from the tunnel entrance. Got it, Lily said. They were 20 yards from the tunnel mouth when the voice came from behind them. That's far enough. They stopped. The man who stepped from the shadows of a side passage was not Cowell. He was younger, perhaps 25, with a rifle carried in a way that suggested he was comfortable with it. He looked at Lily first, then at Cora with the careful assessment of someone calculating a problem. What are you two doing in the mine? He asked. We got lost, Cora said immediately and pleasantly. We were walking along the ridge road and took a wrong turn. My friend was curious about the operation. She has never seen a mine before. The man's expression suggested he did not believe this. Holt does not like unauthorized visitors on the property, he said. We are sorry to have caused any trouble, Lily said. We will leave immediately. I hope there is no need to involve Mr. Holt in what was simply a case of poor navigation. A pause. He was still looking at her, and she could see him working through the calculation. Two women, one local, one a stranger wandering in a mine they should not be in. The question on his face was not whether they were innocent, it was whether confronting them created more trouble than it solved. Get out, he said finally, and do not come back. They walked out of the tunnel into the afternoon light at the exact pace of people who had done nothing wrong, neither hurrying nor slowing, and Lily did not let herself exhale until they were a quarter-mile from the mine property on the Ridge Road North. You were very calm, Cora said. My father taught me that the most dangerous thing you can do when someone questions you is to look like you have something to hide, Lily said, even when you do. Back in town, she went to the telegraph office. The operator was a thin man named Hedges, perhaps 50, with ink-stained fingers, and the careful, watchful quality of someone who spent his working life receiving other people's secrets. He looked at Lily with the same assessment everyone in Garnet Crossing seemed to give her, the calculation of what she was and why she was here and whether it was his business. She had thought carefully about what she was going to say to him. Mr. Hedges, she said, I need to send a telegraph to the Pinkerton National Detective Agency office in Denver. I understand that you may be in a position where sending such a message creates difficulties for you. I want you to know that I am aware of those difficulties, and I want to tell you that the man who created them is going to be removed from a position of power in this territory within the week. What you do in the next 5 minutes will determine which side of that you are on. Hedges looked at her for a long moment. You are very sure of yourself, he said. I have the documentation to back it up, she said. Every detail of the financial arrangement between Dexter Holt and his partners in San Francisco. Every transaction. Every name. She let the silence hold for a moment. Including the names of the men who hold Mr. Holt's debts, which I imagine he has not told you about. Something flickered in his expression. What debts? He said carefully. Holt owes $300,000 to investors in New York and San Francisco who believe they are receiving returns from legitimate mining operations. When it comes out, and it will come out, that the operations are fraudulent, those investors will want their money back. The man running a telegraph office in a company-owned town may find that his own position becomes complicated. She let that land. Unless he was on record as having cooperated with a legitimate investigation. Hedges was quiet for a long time. What do you need to send? He said at last. The telegraph went to the Denver Pinkerton office addressed to the regional director whose name Cole had given her. It was brief and carefully worded documentation recovered operative's innocence. Demonstrable trial in 4 days immediate legal assistance. Required contact through boarding house. Garnet Crossing, signed Lily Shen. She paid Hedges with the last of her money. She walked back through the cold, late afternoon to Cora's boarding house and sat down at the kitchen table and realized with a kind of dizzy clarity that she had spent everything she had on a telegraph. She had broken into a mine she was carrying, evidence that 2 powerful men would kill to recover, and she had 4 days to prevent an innocent man from hanging. She was also, she discovered, hungry. There is stew, Cora said from across the room, not looking up from what she was doing. Eat something. You will be no use to anyone if you faint. Lily ate the stew. It was excellent. She thought about telling Cora it was excellent and then decided it could wait. Cole told me something about the night Whitmore died, she said instead. He had arranged the meeting himself. Someone else knew about it. Someone in the cartel or someone watching Whitmore. She looked up. How did Cowell know to come to the mine that night? He arrived with his deputies almost immediately after Cole found the body, too quickly to have been summoned. Cora set down her spoon. He was already there, Cora said slowly. He killed Whitmore himself and he was waiting for Cole to arrive. Which means he knew Cole was coming. Which means the meeting was compromised before it happened. Lily turned the thought over. Cole arranged the meeting through an intermediary. He did not tell me who. I know who, Cora said quietly. I should have told you this morning. A pause waited and uncomfortable. Cole arranged the meeting through a man named Harwick. He runs the assay office. He has been working with Cole for almost a year, feeding information about the mine's actual production numbers. She stopped. He was at Holt's main building the morning after the arrest. I saw him go in. I thought it might be coincidence. It was not coincidence, Lily said. No. Does Harwick know you saw him? I do not believe so. Then he does not know what we know. Lily thought for a moment, which means he may not know that his usefulness as a spy for Holt is about to expire. Men who believe they are safe often make mistakes. Cora looked at her across the stew pot. You have a plan, she said. I have the beginning of one, Lily said. I need to talk to Cole again tonight. Cowell is suspicious. He had 2 men watching the jail all afternoon. I know. Lily looked down at the table. Which means I cannot go through the front. She arrived at the jail 2 hours after midnight from the alley behind it at the single small window of Cole's cell. She had spent the intervening time in Cora's kitchen thinking through every piece of what she knew and how it connected to every other piece, the way her father had taught her to approach a complex account, from the edges inward, finding the pattern, before worrying about the individual entries. The window was perhaps 18 inches square, barred with 2 iron rods that had been set in the stone when the building was constructed. She could not get through it, but she could whisper through it and Cole could hear. She told him about the watch. She told him about Harwick. There was a long silence on the other side of the bars. Harwick, Cole said finally. His voice was very quiet. I trusted him for 11 months. I know. He told Cowell about the meeting. He set me up. Yes, but he does not know that we know. And in 4 days, if the Pinkerton office in Denver receive my own telegraph and acts on it, there will be federal investigators in this valley with the authority to compel testimony. A pause with the bomb. Do we need Harwick to believe he is still safe until then? If he suspects the investigation is back on track, he will run or warn Holt. Or he will come after you. The thought settled in the cold air between them. That is also possible, Lily admitted. You should leave, Cole said. Take the documentation and go to Rollins. Give it to a federal authority. You will be safe. The evidence will be in legitimate hands. And you will hang before the investigators arrive, she said. A silence. Yes, he said. Then I am not leaving. Another silence longer. Why bye? Cole asked. His voice had shifted, become something more careful and less certain than anything she had heard from him before. Because the documentation alone is not enough, she said. It needs testimony. Your testimony, your agency's backing the physical evidence of Cowell's watch. It needs someone who knows how it all connects. That is you, which means you need to be alive and standing in front of a judge. She paused. And because my father worked for 2 years to build this case and he is not here to see it through, I am. A longer silence. Miss Shen, Cole said. Lily. A moment. Lily. Her name and his voice quiet and careful. The investigators, if they come, when they come, there is going to be a confrontation. Holt is not going to let this go without a fight. He has 30 men on his payroll and a sheriff in his pocket. Even with federal authority, this could get violent. I know. And you are still not leaving. I burned my wedding veil, she said. I climbed out a 2nd-story window in a rainstorm. I crossed a continent alone with $19 and a letter from a stranger. I broke into an operational mine and recovered evidence while a guard with a rifle was 20 feet away. She paused. I would appreciate it, Mr. Hargrove, if you would update your assessment of what I am and am not capable of. Through the iron bars of the window in the darkness of the Wyoming night, she heard something she had not heard from him before. He was laughing. It was quiet and brief and clearly surprised him as much as it did her. But it was genuine, the laugh of a man who had forgotten somewhere in the last 3 weeks that such a thing was possible. "Cole," he said. "What, my name? It is Cole, not Mr. Hargrove." She was quiet for a moment. "Cole," she said. "Get some sleep," he said. "You are going to need it." She walked back to the boarding house through the frozen pre-dawn dark, and she thought about the laugh and the way her name had sounded in his voice, and she told herself firmly that these were not things she had time to think about. She thought about them anyway. The reply from Denver arrived the following morning. Hedges brought it to the boarding house himself, which told her something about what had shifted in him overnight. He handed her the paper without ceremony and waited. The message was from a Pinkerton regional director named Calloway. It confirmed receipt. It confirmed that a senior investigator with federal credentials was already en route. It said in the compressed language of telegraph communication that the agency had been waiting for this break in the case for 6 months and was prepared to move aggressively. Estimated arrival 2 days. The trial was in 3. 1 day of margin, 1 day between the arrival of investigators with the authority to intervene and the moment a judge would call a courtroom to order and a man would stand trial for a murder he did not commit. "Is it enough?" Cora asked, reading over her shoulder. "It will have to be," Lily said. She folded the message and put it in her satchel. Outside, the November sky was the color of iron, and somewhere in the valley, Dexter Holt was going about his business with the comfortable certainty of a man who believed he had already won. He had 2 days to remain certain. After that, everything would change. The day and a half that followed were the most carefully controlled hours of Lily's life. She had always been organized, her father's daughter trained to think in ledgers and contingencies, but she had never before been required to organize against a clock, while the people she was working against had the power to make the clock stop altogether. She could not appear to be doing what she was doing. That was the central constraint. Cowell was watching the boarding house. She could feel it, the particular quality of attention that made the back of her neck prickle when she walked across the main street. Holt's men moved through town with a visibility that was itself a message, a reminder that the valley belonged to the cartel, and that anyone who thought otherwise was making a calculation that would not end in their favor. Lily made her calculations anyway. She established a routine. Mornings at the general store, purchasing small amounts at a time: flour, salt, dried beans, in quantities that suggested domestic economy rather than anything purposeful. She talked to Harlow, the storekeeper, about the weather and the price of goods, and the kind of nothing that fills conversation in places where strangers are watched and noted. She was pleasant and curious and comprehensively unremarkable. In the afternoon, she helped Cora with the boarding house, cooking, cleaning, the 100 small tasks that kept a working establishment functional. She did this with complete sincerity because Cora was housing her and feeding her when she had nothing left to offer in exchange, and because the work itself was steadying. In the evening, she wrote. She was building a master document, a comprehensive account of the cartel's operations assembled from Cole's reports, her father's records, and her own analysis of the financial movements. She was writing it not as a legal brief. She was not a lawyer, but as a narrative. The kind of account that someone intelligent and skeptical could follow from beginning to end and arrive at the same conclusion she had arrived at. She was writing it for the investigators from Denver, for the federal judge, who would eventually hear the case, for the record that would outlast whatever confrontation was coming. She was writing it for her father. On the morning before the investigators were due to arrive, Harwick came into the boarding house. She recognized him from Cora's description: middle-aged, mild-looking, the kind of face that invited trust by appearing to require nothing in return for it. He came in during the breakfast hour when the dining room held 4 other guests and sat down at a table 2 removed from hers with the casual air of a man who had simply come for coffee. He looked at her once, just once and briefly, but with a specificity that told her everything he knew: who she was, he knew what she was doing, and he had come to assess the threat. She looked back at him with the blank, faintly curious expression of a woman who did not recognize him. Then she went back to her breakfast. For the next 20 minutes, she could feel his attention like a hand against her back. He finished his coffee, slowly said something pleasant to Cora besides about the weather, and left. 10 minutes later, Cora appeared at her table. "He is going to Holt," Cora said quietly. "I know. When he tells a Holt you have the documentation, he does not know I have it. He suspects, but he does not know what I have or how much or where it is." Lily kept her voice level. "He came here to look at me and calculate. He saw a young woman eating breakfast. That is all he can tell Holt." Will that be enough? It needs to hold for one more day. She looked at the door Harwick had used. Where does Holt meet with his men? When he does not want to be seen. Cora hesitated. There is a building behind the assay office, she said, not on any official map of the property. Holt uses it for meetings he would rather not have in the main building. If Harwick goes there today, I need to know what is said. I cannot get close to that building without being seen. Who can? A pause. The boy who does the wood deliveries, Cora said slowly. He is 14. Nobody watches 14-year-old boys delivering wood. His name is Sam. Will he help? I can ask him. His father lost his claim last year in a dispute with Holt that was decided in Holt's favor by Sheriff Cowell. A pause. I think he will help. Sam was a thin, serious boy with the self-possession of someone who had grown up in a place where adults did not have time to be careful around children, and he listened to what Cora explained with the focused attention of someone who understood that he was being asked to do something real. I can get close to the back of that building, he said. There is a wood pile against the south wall. I fill it every Thursday. Today is Wednesday, Cora said. I know, but nobody checks the schedule that carefully. He looked at Lily. What do you need to know? Whether they know I have the documentation, whether they plan to move against me before tomorrow, whether they intend to interfere with the trial. I can listen, he said. I am good at not being noticed. He came back 2 hours later with the look of a boy who has overheard something that has clarified several things at once. Holt knows about the telegraph, he said. Hedges told him. Lily felt the ground shift slightly. When yesterday, from what I heard, Holt has been waiting to see if anyone responds. Sam looked at her steadily. He said Holt said that if federal investigation arrived before the trial gets moved up. He said Cowell can push it through tonight if he has to, get a verdict before anyone can interfere. Lily was very still. Tonight, she said. That is what he said. He does not know you are listening. He thinks he has time. She looked at Cora. Cole needs to know, she said. And we need to know how long it takes to change a trial date, what procedures exist, whether Cowell has the authority. He does not, Cora said immediately. The circuit judge sets the trial date. Cowell can request an emergency session, but the judge has to agree. And Judge Morrow, she stopped. What? Judge Morrow is not Holt's man. He is the one judge in this territory that Holt has not been able to buy. He has been inconsistent on questions involving Chinese defendants. Cora's voice was careful. I want to be honest with you about that. He is not a reliable advocate for your interests specifically. Lily absorbed this. But he is honest about the law, she said. As far as I know. Then he can be worked with. She stood. I need to talk to Judge Morrow before Cowell does. The judge is at his office above the assay building, not Holt's assay building, the territorial 1-2 streets east. I know where it is. She picked up her satchel. I need you to get a message to Cole, not through the jail. Is there another way? Cora thought for a moment. Garber sometimes takes dinner to the prisoners, she said. He gets it from here. If there was a note in the dinner. Write it plainly. Cole knows how to read a plain message as a careful one. Lily paused at the door. Tell him the trial may be tonight. Tell him to be ready. Ready for what she did not entirely know. But Cole, she had come to believe, was the kind of person who knew what to do with readiness when it arrived. Judge Morrow was a compact, silver-haired man in his late 60s who sat behind a desk arranged with the precision of someone who respected order as a professional matter. He looked up when Lily came in with the expression of a man who had learned to read visitors quickly and was already forming a preliminary assessment. Miss Shen, he said before she could introduce herself. You know my name. It is a small valley. Sit down. She sat. She opened her satchel. She placed the oilskin package on his desk. That is the complete documentation of a fraudulent mining operation, financial crimes across 2 territories and 2 states, and evidence of the wrongful arrest of a Pinkerton operative, she said. The trial of that operative is scheduled for tomorrow. I have been informed that Sheriff Cowell may attempt to move the trial to tonight before federal investigators who are currently in transit can arrive. Morrow looked at the package. He did not touch it. You are telling me that Sheriff Cowell would attempt to improperly influence the scheduling of a trial under my jurisdiction, he said. I am telling you that a man with significant motivation to see Cole Hargrove convicted before legitimate oversight can arrive, may attempt to accelerate the proceedings. I am also telling you that the documentation in that package, together with physical evidence currently in my possession, is sufficient to exonerate Mr. Hargrove and implicate the actual perpetrators of the crime he is charged with. A silence. You are very confident, Morrow said. I am very well documented. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she could not entirely read. This territory, he said slowly, has been arranged in Dexter Holt's favor for 3 years. I have seen it. I have been obliged to rule in ways that I found imperfectly justified because the evidence presented to me was incomplete. A pause. Incomplete in ways that, looking at what you have placed on my desk, I am beginning to understand. The evidence was not incomplete, Lily said. It was suppressed. Another silence. Leave the package, he said. I will review it tonight. If it is what you say it is, it is. If it is, I will ensure that Mr. Hargrove's trial proceeds with proper consideration of all available evidence, and I will not be accelerating the schedule for any reason. He looked at her over the top of the package. Cowell will not be pleased. No, Lily agreed, he will not. She stood to leave. Miss Shen, his voice was careful, you understand that what you have done recovering this evidence, delivering it, places you in some danger. I understand. Do you have somewhere safe to be tonight? She thought of Cora's boarding house where she could feel the weight of Holt's attention like weather. I will manage, she said. She walked out of Morrow's office into the cold afternoon and stood for a moment in the street calculating. She had given the judge the documentation. She still had Cowell's watch in her satchel. She had established that the trial would not be moved. The investigators were due tomorrow. What she had not accounted for was Harwick, who had gone to Holt, who now knew that something was happening, who would be calculating his own position and deciding whether to run or to act. She was a block from the boarding house when someone stepped out of the alley beside her, not Harwick. A man she had not seen before, large, hard-faced, with the particular quality of stillness that was not Cole's kind of stillness, but something with more threat in it. Mr. Holt would like a word, he said. Lily looked at him. I am not available, she said. That was not a request. She looked at the satchel on her shoulder. The watch was inside. The master document she had been writing was inside. These things could not be taken. Where, she said. The building behind the assay office was exactly as Cora had described it, unassuming, unmarked, the kind of structure that existed to be overlooked. Inside it was sparse and functional, a table, several chairs, a stove that was generating heat but no warmth. Dexter Holt was sitting at the table. He was at first glance not what she had expected. She had assembled a picture of him from Cole's reports and Cora's descriptions, powerful, calculating, accustomed to operating without opposition, and the man in front of her matched that picture in its essentials but not in its particulars. He was perhaps 55, dressed well, but not ostentatiously, with the careful, deliberate manner of someone who had learned that composure was more intimidating than force. He looked at her with an expression of mild interest, the way a man looks at a problem he finds unexpectedly complex. Miss Shen, he said, sit down. She sat. She kept the satchel on her shoulder. You have been busy since you arrived, he said. I appreciate industry. What do you want, Mr. Holt? I want to understand what you are hoping to accomplish. He folded his hands on the table. You have come a long way to interfere in something that does not involve you. It involves my father, she said, and it involves a man who is innocent of what he is charged with. Hargrove. A slight pause. Hargrove is a Pinkerton agent who was found at the scene of a murder. The evidence is clear. The evidence was arranged, she said. You know that, I know that. The question is whether we are going to pretend otherwise. He looked at her with something that might have been appreciation for her directness. I am prepared to be generous, he said. You are clearly intelligent. You have traveled a considerable distance on behalf of a man you barely know. I find that admirable in its way. He leaned forward slightly. I am prepared to ensure that you are compensated fairly for your time, for your trouble, and for any documentation you may have recovered. And I am prepared to ensure that you leave this territory safely and without interference. In exchange for, she said, the documentation, whatever you have found, and your agreement to go home and put this behind you. Home, she said. I do not have a home. Aldrich Vane owns my home. Something flickered in his expression, the first real crack in his composure. Vane is a business associate, he said carefully. Vane is your primary financier and the man who arranged for my father's death. She kept her voice level. I know what is in those documents, Mr. Holt. I have read every line. I know how the money moves and where it goes and who receives it. I know that my father discovered what was being done through his business and that he was killed for it. I know that Cole Hargrove was framed specifically to prevent this case from reaching trial. She looked at him across the table. So when you say you are prepared to be generous, I want you to understand that I understand what that offer means and what it is worth. The room was very quiet. Holt looked at her for a long time. You are making a mistake, he said finally. His voice had changed the surface pleasantness, gone something colder underneath. That is possible, she said. It is also possible that the federal investigators who will arrive tomorrow morning are going to find a very complete and very well-documented case waiting for them, and that the next conversation about mistakes will take place in a federal courtroom. She stood. I am going to leave now, she said. The large man who escorted me here, I would appreciate your assurance that he will not interfere with my departure. A very long pause. Go, Holt said. She walked out of the building and down the alley and back to the main street, and she did not look back, and she did not let herself run, and she did not stop moving until she was inside the boarding house, with the door shut behind her, and Cora standing in the kitchen looking at her with an expression that said she had already heard something. Holt's men have been asking questions about Judge Morrow, Cora said. Good, Lily said and sat down. That means they know the trial cannot be moved. It also means they are trying something else. Yes. Lily set the satchel carefully on the table. It means we have tonight to get through and tomorrow morning, and then everything changes. She had never in her life been more tired. The exhaustion was not physical, though she was that as well. It was something deeper, the exhaustion of sustained alertness, of maintaining composure under pressure for days without relief. Cora put tea in front of her without being asked. You went to see Holt, she said. He sent for me. I went. And he offered me money to go away. And what I declined. Lily wrapped her hands around the cup. He is going to do something tonight. I do not know what. But men like that, when negotiation fails, they do not accept failure. They look for another lever. Cole, Cora said quietly. Lily looked up. If they move Cole before morning, Cora stopped. Transfer him to another facility, or worse. Without the trial, without him as a witness, the case loses its central voice. The documentation is important, but testimony is, I know. Lily stood. I need to go to the jail. Cowell will not let you in. Cowell does not need to let me in. She picked up the satchel. He needs to be made to understand that whatever he is planning to do tonight will be documented and witnessed and added to the record that is currently sitting on Judge Morrow's desk. She looked at Cora. Where is Sam? Asleep, probably. Wake him. I need a witness. Someone who can stand in a visible place and be seen watching. Not doing anything, just watching. Cora looked at her for a moment. You are going to use the threat of observation as a deterrent, she said. I am going to make it very clear that anything that happens tonight happens in front of witnesses, and that those witnesses have already provided statements to Judge Morrow. Lily paused. Cowell is Holt's man, but he is also a man who lives in this valley and will continue to live here after Holt is gone. He has to decide which future he is building toward. She went to the jail at 9 o'clock that night, with Sam walking 3 paces behind her, and Cora positioned at the corner of the street where she could be seen from the jail door. Cowell was at his desk. He looked up when she came in with the expression of a man who had been waiting for something unpleasant and was not surprised to find it had arrived. I need to verify that the prisoner is present and unharmed, Lily said. You have no authority here, Cowell said. No, but Judge Morrow has been informed of my concerns, and if I do not return to the boarding house within the hour, a message will be sent to his residence. She met his eyes steadily. I need to see the prisoner. A long silence. Something worked through Cowell's face, the calculation of a man who had built his position on Holt's certainty and was now confronting the possibility that the certainty was not as solid as advertised. 5 minutes, he said. Cole was in his cell on his feet, and the expression on his face when she came through the door was complicated. Relief, she thought, and something underneath it she did not have time to examine. "You are all right," he said. "I met with Holt this afternoon," she said quietly. "I declined his offer. The judge has the documentation. The investigators arrive tomorrow. I need you to be here in the morning." "I intend to be." "Cowell is considering his options. I believe he is not going to move against you tonight. The exposure is too high, but I want you to know that Sam and Cora are outside and that any movement in this jail tonight will be observed and documented." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You have been very busy," he said. "I had 6 days," she said. "I used them." He was looking at her with an expression she recognized now, the careful, provisional assessment of the first night, except that something in it had shifted, become less guarded, more direct. "When this is over," he said. She waited. "When this is over and I am not in a jail cell," he said carefully, "I would like to have a conversation that is not conducted through iron bars under time pressure." She felt something loosen slightly in her chest. "Yes," she said, "I would like that as well." She walked back through the jail the way she had come past Cowell, who did not look at her, and out into the cold Wyoming night where Sam was standing at his post with the serious, focused expression of a 14-year-old who understood that he was doing something real. Tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow everything. She walked back to the boarding house and lay down fully dressed on her narrow bed and held her father's pocket watch in her hand and waited for morning. It came the way important mornings always come, not with announcement, but with the ordinary light of a new day that had no idea what it contained. At 7 in the morning, 2 men arrived in Garnet Crossing on horses that had been ridden hard from the south. They were Pinkerton investigators from the Denver office, and they carried federal authority and the particular bearing of men who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Lily met them at the boarding house before they had been in town 20 minutes. She handed them the master document she had spent 4 nights writing. She showed them Cowell's watch. She told them everything. The investigators' names were Sutton and Kane. Sutton was the senior man, 50 broad, with the practiced calm of someone who had seen enough of human dishonesty to stop being surprised by it. Kane was perhaps 35, faster moving, with a mind that caught implications quickly and a habit of noting things in a small book he kept in his breast pocket. They listened to Lily without interrupting. Sutton read the master document while Kane examined Cowell's watch, turning it over in his hands with the careful attention of a man who understood what he was holding. When she finished, Sutton set down the document and looked at her over the top of it with an expression that was not quite admiration, but was in the vicinity of it. "You have been here 4 days," he said, "5 counting last night. And in that time you recovered the documentation, identified the sheriff as the actual perpetrator of the murder, established communication with the federal judge, made the case for your client's innocence, and sat across from the most powerful man in the valley and declined his attempt to buy you off." "Yes," Lily said. Sutton looked at Kane. "Your father," Sutton said, turning back to her, "sent us a preliminary report 9 months ago. We have been trying to reconstruct the evidentiary chain ever since. You reconstructed it in 5 days." "I had the advantage of knowing where to look," she said, "and I had Cora." Kane had been reading the master document in parallel with Sutton's review of the physical evidence. He looked up. "This analysis of the financial movements, this is your own work." "My father taught me accounts. I have been managing a business since I was 16. She paused. "He also taught me to follow the money, which is, I believe, the relevant skill." "The trial's this afternoon," Kane said. "If we move now, we can have Cole out of that cell before the trial is called," Sutton said. He was already standing. "Miss Shen, I need you to stay here." "I will not." A brief considering pause. "You will stay here until we have established the situation with the judge," Sutton said with the careful precision of a man who had decided to negotiate rather than command. "After that, if Judge Morrow requires your testimony, which he will, you will be present. But we need to move first without an audience that Cowell can point to as provocation." It was a reasonable argument. She recognized it as such. "1 hour," she said. "After 1 hour, I am coming regardless." Sutton almost smiled. 1 hour, he said. The hour was the longest of her life. She spent it in the boarding house kitchen with Cora, drinking coffee she could not taste and going over for the 100th time whether she had missed anything. Whether there was a gap in the documentation, an inconsistency in her account, a piece of evidence that could be challenged or dismissed. You have not missed anything, Cora said after Lily had been silent for a long time. You cannot know that. I know that you have been through it 100 times and found the same things 100 times. At some point, you have to trust the work and let it do what it is supposed to do. Cora set down her cup. The rest is not in your hands. It should be. It never entirely is. That is not a failure. That is just how things work. Cora looked at her. You did what you came here to do. Whatever happens now, you did your part. Lily thought about her father at his desk, building his careful case in silence, never getting to see it through. She thought about the letter, its instruction to be brave. She thought about the window she had climbed out of in the San Francisco rain, the drop to the garden below the running. She had not stopped running since then. Maybe she thought she was close to stopping. 40 minutes after the investigators left, Sam appeared at the boarding house door. Something is happening at the jail, he said, slightly out of breath. The investigators went in. Cowell is arguing. There are 3 more men I do not recognize around the building. Federal men? I think so. They have the look. Lily stood. I am going, she said to Cora. Your hour is not up. Near enough. The scene on the main street was controlled but tense in the way that controlled things often are, the tension visible in the stillness of it, the way people had stopped in their ordinary business and were watching from angles that suggested they did not want to be seen watching. Sutton and 2 other men with federal authorities stood at the jail door. Inside, she could hear Cowell's voice raised in argument. She walked up to Sutton. We need your testimony, he said without preamble. Morrow has agreed to an emergency proceeding this afternoon. Not the trial, a preliminary hearing to present the new evidence and formally request dismissal of the charges against Hargrove. Cowell is fighting it. Cowell is doing what men in his position do when they are losing, talking loudly and providing nothing. Sutton looked at her. Morrow will be ready at noon. I need you prepared to testify about the documentation, the watch, and your father's role in the investigation. I am prepared. There will be opposition. Holt's lawyers are already at Morrow's office. They will challenge the provenance of the evidence, your authority to recover it, the authenticity of the documentation. Let them buy it, Lily said. I have the originals. I have the oilskin. I have the chain of custody. I have every piece. She paused. My father was meticulous, so was Cole, and so am I. She was allowed to see Cole for the first time outside a jail cell context when Sutton brought him out under custody transfer 30 minutes before the hearing, technically still a prisoner, technically still under arrest, but with the quality of someone for whom the technical status was rapidly becoming a formality. He looked better than she expected. Tired, thinner, with the jail bruise on his jaw faded to a faint yellow ghost, but alert in the way she had come to identify as characteristic of him, present, watchful, nothing wasted. He looked at her. You held the hour, he said. Near enough, she said. I heard you talk to Holt. He made an offer. I declined. I heard that too. Something in his expression. That was extremely dangerous. Most of the last 5 days has been extremely dangerous, she said. I have begun to recalibrate. The corner of his mouth moved. How is your ankle? He asked. She blinked. My ankle. You landed badly when you climbed out the window. You told me through the cell window 3 nights ago. He was watching her with the careful attention she had come to recognize. You mentioned it in passing. You did not seem to think it was important. It is not important. It is to me, he said, quietly, without ceremony, the way he said things that mattered. She looked at him for a moment. It is fine, she said. A slight twist. It healed. Good. Judge Morrow's hearing convened at noon in the small courthouse building on the east end of the main street. The room held perhaps 20 people, the judge behind his bench, Sutton and Kane at one table, two lawyers Lily did not recognize at another, Cole seated between 2 federal officers, Cora at the back, several townsfolk who had come to watch something they sensed was important. Dexter Holt was not present. His absence was itself significant, Lily thought. A man who was certain of his position would have come to watch. A man who was recalculating had stayed away. The hearing was formal, methodical, and thorough. Morrow ran it with the precision of a man who had spent decades developing an instinct for when a proceeding was properly conducted and when it was not. Lily testified for 40 minutes. She presented the documentation from her father's records, explaining each piece in the context of the larger pattern. She presented Cole's reports, walking through the operational structure of the cartel. She presented Cowell's watch, explaining the circumstances of its recovery and the significance of the engraving. Holt's lawyers challenged everything: her authority to recover the documentation, the chain of custody for the watch, the credibility of her father's records, her own qualification to interpret financial documents, her status as a stranger with no established connection to the territory. She answered each challenge calmly and specifically, with the documentation open in front of her and the memory of her father's careful handwriting steady in her mind. Sutton supplemented her testimony with the agency's own investigation findings. Kane walked through the financial analysis. A third Pinkerton man, who had apparently arrived during the night, which explained the extra federal presence Lily had noticed, presented the agency's records on the cartel's operations going back 3 years. At 2 in the afternoon, Morrow called a recess. At 2:30, he returned. "This court finds," he said in the quiet, certain voice of a man who has reached a conclusion he trusts, "that the evidence presented today is sufficient to establish that the charges against Cole Hargrove are without merit and were filed in bad faith. The charges are dismissed." He looked at Sutton. "I am also issuing warrants for the arrest of Sheriff Russ Cowell on charges of murder, evidence tampering, and abuse of office. I am requesting federal assistance in the arrest of Dexter Holt on charges of fraud, financial crimes, and conspiracy." A pause. "These proceedings will continue, but Mr. Hargrove is no longer a defendant." The room was very quiet. Then Cora at the back started to clap. Just her at first, the sound sharp in the still air. Then Sam beside her. Then 2 or 3 others, people Lily did not know. People who had been watching from the back of the room with expressions she had not had time to read. Cole was standing. He was looking at Lily, and his expressions, she had learned to read his expressions in compressed, difficult circumstances, and she could read this one. Relief genuine and deep. And something else. She looked back at him. She thought, "We made it." Then she thought, what happens now? The answer to that question developed over the next 2 weeks in the particular incremental way that aftermaths develop, not dramatically, but in pieces, each one adding to the previous, until the shape of the new situation became clear. Cowell was arrested before evening on the day of the hearing. He did not resist, which was, Sutton said, the behavior of a man who understood that his leverage was gone. He confirmed in the subsequent interview that he had killed Whitmore on Holt's instructions and that he had arranged the evidence against Cole with Harwick's assistance. Harwick, presented with this information, confirmed his own role and provided additional details about the cartel's operations that corroborated everything in Cole's reports and Lily's documentation. Holt was a more complicated matter. He was found 3 days after the hearing at his main ranch property north of town with 2 lawyers and the beginning of a prepared defense. The federal charges were extensive. His lawyers were good. The case would take time. But the outcome, Sutton told Lily, was not in question. "Your father's documentation is the cornerstone," he said. "Everything else, Cole's reports, the testimony, the financial analysis, it all builds on what James Shen assembled. Without his records, we might have been able to make a partial case. With them, it is complete." Lily thought about her father at his desk alone, afraid to move against a powerful man building his case for someone else to use. "He knew he was not going to be the one to finish it," she said. "Perhaps." Sutton was quiet for a moment. "He trusted you to do it. That is its own kind of courage." Aldrich Vane was arrested in San Francisco on a Thursday morning, 6 days after the Wyoming warrants were issued. Lily received the news by telegraph relayed through the Pinkerton, Denver office. The charges included financial fraud conspiracy, and the charge that had taken the longest to establish, and that the investigators were most careful about the question of James Shen's death. Fever, it had been called. The subsequent investigation would determine that Vane had arranged for the fever, that he had known James Shen was building a case against him, that he had acted before the case could be completed. Lily read the telegraph twice. She folded it carefully. She put it in her satchel beside her father's pocket watch. "Are you all right?" Cole asked. They were in the boarding house kitchen. It had become, in the 2 weeks since the hearing, something like a headquarters, the place where information arrived and decisions were made, and the people involved in the aftermath of the Garnet Crossing case gathered to think through the next steps. Lily looked across the table at him. "He had my father killed," she said. "Yes. I knew it. I had known it since the first night in your cell, but knowing and she stopped, and having it confirmed are different things. Yes, he said again. Just that. She was grateful for it. She was grateful that he did not reach for something to say that would make it smaller or neater. He understood, she thought, the difference between a wound that needed treatment and one that needed to be allowed to be what it was. He will go to prison, she said after a while. Yes, that will not bring my father back. No, but it was what your father wanted, what he worked toward. Cole's voice was quiet and direct. He wanted the record to be true. He wanted someone to know what had actually happened. A pause. You made that possible. Lily looked down at the table. She thought about the wedding dress she had never worn. She thought about the window, the rain, the running. She thought about all the ways the last 3 weeks had been terrifying and impossible, and more real than anything she had ever done. She thought about what came next. I have no home, she said. I know. The house in San Francisco reverted to Vane. With Vane arrested, she thought through the legal implications. It is possible there will be a claim proceeding. The debt structure was fraudulent, which means the lawyers will sort it out, Cole said. That will take time. Yes. In the meantime, he was quiet for a moment. In the meantime, there is a question about where you are and what you are doing. He looked at her steadily. Sutton has asked if you would be willing to consult on the Holt case. The financial documentation, no one understands it as well as you do. It will need someone to guide it through the legal proceedings. Sutton asked, she said. Yes. And then you are telling me this because it would mean staying in the territory for several more months, Cole said. And I wanted you to know that if that were a factor in your decision, it is relevant to me. She looked at him. He looked back. Cole, she said. Yes. You are doing something I recognize from myself. You are circling around a thing you want to say and offering it through practical logistics so that if I do not respond well, you can pretend you only meant the practical part. A silence. Yes, he said. Stop doing that. He was very still. I want to stay, she said. Not for the case. I mean, yes, the case matters, and I will do the work because it needs to be done. But that is not why. She met his eyes. I want to stay because I have spent 3 weeks doing something real in a place that asked nothing from me except what I was actually capable of, and I do not know what home means anymore, but this is closer than anything I have had since my father died. She paused. And because of you. That is also true, and I am choosing to say it plainly. Cole's expression was something she did not have a word for. Lily, he said. Yes. I have been in rooms with people who were trying to kill me, and I was less frightened than I am right now. She felt something loosen in her chest, warm and tentative. That is... She stopped, started again. That is the most honestly terrifying thing anyone has ever said to me. I mean it as a compliment, he said. I know. She reached across the table. She put her hand over his. I know. Outside, in Garnet Crossing, the afternoon was cold and clear, and the mountains stood against the sky with the same absolute permanence they had always had, indifferent to the particular human drama playing out in the boarding house below them. Inside Lily, Shen sat with her hand over Cole Hargrove's hand and thought about her father's pocket watch ticking in her satchel, keeping time towards something new. She did not know what it would look like, this new thing. She did not know where she would live or who she would be or how the months and years ahead would arrange themselves. She knew the Holt case would take time. She knew the legal proceedings involving Vane in San Francisco would require her attention. She knew the house on Nob Hill might or might not come back to her and that it would not feel the same even if it did. She knew that Cole Hargrove was looking at her across the table with an expression she had come to understand over the compressed, impossible intensity of the last 3 weeks was the rarest kind of attention, the kind that saw you as you were and chose you anyway. She knew that she had burned her wedding veil and that the life she had built in the 5 days since arriving in Garnet Crossing was not the life she had expected, and that the difference between those two lives was the difference between living and being owned. She kept her hand over his. The consulting work, she said. Yes. When does Sutton need an answer? Tomorrow morning. Then tonight we should probably eat something. He almost smiled. The almost smile had become, over the course of the last weeks, something she looked for, the particular compression of his mouth, the slight deepening of the lines around his eyes, the way it was always followed by something real. Cora has stew, he said. Cora always has stew. She stood. And then if you are willing, I would like to have that conversation you mentioned, the one that is not conducted through iron bars under time pressure. Cole stood. I have been looking forward to it, he said, and for the first time the smile reached completion. The conversation lasted 3 hours. They sat in the boarding house parlor after dinner in the 2 chairs nearest the stove, while outside the November wind moved around the building's corners, with the particular insistence of Wyoming winter beginning to assert itself. Cora had excused herself with the tact of someone who understood the nature of what was in the room and had no interest in interrupting it. The conversation was not as conversations like this rarely are the thing itself. It was the approach to the thing, the circling, the careful disclosure, the exchange of pieces of history, and the testing of how each piece landed. Cole talked about the war briefly and without embellishment. 4 years in uniform. Things he had seen that he would not describe specifically, but that had reconfigured everything he understood about what human beings were capable of. The Pinkerton work that had followed not a conscious choice exactly, more a practical application of the skills the war had left him, with the ability to observe without being observed, to move through environments of threat without becoming a target, to remain calm under pressure in ways that most people found unnerving. It did not feel like a gift at first, he said. What did it feel like? Like something I had been left with after something else was taken away. Lily thought about it. My father used to say that the things we think we have lost are sometimes the things that were holding us back, she said. I did not understand that when he said it. I was 19 and my mother had been dead 12 years, and I could not see what she might have been holding me back from. And now I think he meant himself in part, that he was aware of his own limitations, the things he could not say or could not do, and that he hoped I would not be similarly constrained. She paused. He wanted me to be free in a way that he was not, and he spent a long time building something that would in the end help make that possible. Cole was quiet for a moment. He must have been proud of you, he said. He died before I had done anything worth being proud of. She heard the flatness in her own voice. At least anything he could see. I think he could see further than that, Cole said. They sat with that for a moment. She told him about Boston, about the years of her childhood before her mother died, which were the warmest years she could remember. About her father's careful, patient education of her, the books he pressed into her hands, the ledgers he showed her, the conversations across the dinner table that were not conversations most fathers had with their daughters. About the gradual narrowing that began when his debts accumulated and Vane entered their lives, the way the house that had always felt expansive began to feel like a room getting smaller. When did you know it was going to end like it ended? Cole asked. The day he died, she said, standing at his grave. Vane offered his condolences before the earth was fully settled and then made his offer within the week. A pause. I knew that day that the choice was going to come. I spent 8 months hoping I was wrong. You were not wrong. No. But you were also not where you were supposed to end up, he said. Boston was not the end of your story. She looked at him across the stove. No, she said, it was not. The fire settled. Outside, the wind moved. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask. When this is over, when the cases are resolved, Holt Vane, all of it, what do you want? He met her eyes. Not what is available to you, not what is practical or logical. What do you want? No one had asked her that, not since her father died, not even before. I want to work, she said after a moment. Real work, work that matters. The financial analysis, the documentation, the business of understanding how money moves and who it serves and whether it is being used honestly, I am good at it. I want to use it for something. She paused. I want a place that is mine, not by inheritance or by marriage, but because I built it or earned it. She looked at him steadily. And I want, she stopped. Say it, he said. I want to stop being afraid, she said. Not of danger. I think I can manage danger. I mean of the other kind. The kind where you have something that matters and you are waiting for it to be taken away. A silence. I know that kind, Cole said quietly. I know you do. The fire in the stove made its small domestic sounds. Somewhere in the building a door opened and closed. I have been offered a position, Cole said. The Pinkerton agency wants me to continue work in the territory. The whole case will take another year to prosecute. There will be other cases after that. The cartel has reached beyond Wyoming, and dismantling it is going to require ongoing investigation. He paused. It is good work. Work that matters. Yes, she said. I have been thinking about whether to accept it. What have you concluded? That I want to accept it. He looked at her. And that I want if you are willing not to do it alone. The words were simple and careful and contained everything he was not saying, which was she understood the way he said the things that mattered most. In what capacities, she asked, and then before he could answer, she said, that is another question designed to let you be practical if the answer is not what I hope it is. Yes, he said, it is. Stop doing that too, she said. He was quiet. In every capacity, he said, as a partner, as a colleague, as he stopped. I have been in a cell for 3 weeks waiting to die. I have had a considerable amount of time to think about what I would want if I were not waiting to die. And the primary thing I kept arriving at was, he stopped again. You came 3 days into what should have been a 2-week process, he said. You were 5 days removed from your wedding night. You had $19 and a memorized letter and no plan, and you recovered the documentation and found the watch and confronted Holt and held the trial in place long enough for us to win. He met her eyes. I have been a Pinkerton agent for 7 years. I have worked with a great many people. I have not met anyone like you. That is the most professionally framed declaration I have ever received, she said. He almost smiled. I am aware, he said. I am not, have never been good at this kind of conversation. I find direct action considerably easier than Cole. Yes. I know what you are trying to say. A pause. Do you, he said. Yes. She looked at him with the steady, direct attention she had brought to every piece of this situation, from the cell window to the judge's office to Holt's meeting room. And the answer is yes, to whatever you are trying to ask, because I have also had time to think. And the primary thing I kept arriving at was you. She paused, which is impractical and probably premature and also absolutely true. The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than any they had had before. Cole reached out. He took her hand. His hand was warm and calloused and very steady. Yes, he said, just that. Outside, the wind moved around the corners of the boarding house in Garnet Crossing, Wyoming territory, and the stars burned in the particular intense way of high altitude on a cold, clear night. And two people who had arrived at this moment from entirely different directions sat with their hands linked across the space between them and understood that something had begun. The months that followed were not simple. Important things rarely are. The Holt prosecution moved through the federal courts with the methodical thoroughness that serious financial crimes require. Lily spent considerable time in Denver and Cheyenne working with the prosecutors on the financial documentation, translating the complex network of accounts and transactions into testimony that a court could follow. She was good at it. The prosecutors told her she was good at it in the precise, unsentimental way that people who work with experts complement expertise. The work was satisfying in a way that surprised her. Not just the outcome, though. The outcome mattered, but the process, the building of a coherent picture from disparate pieces, the patient, methodical assembly of truth from partial information. She thought about her father often. The house on Nob Hill was released from the debt proceeding 9 months after Vane's arrest, following a judgment that the debt itself had been fraudulently structured. The house came back to her by legal right. She sold it. The money it generated added to the inheritance her grandmother had left, and the consulting fees she had earned from the Pinkerton agency gave her the foundation she had been assembling in her mind since the night she stood in Cora's storage room and began to understand what had to be done. She used some of it to buy land, not in California, in Wyoming, in a valley 20 miles from Garnet Crossing, where the mountains made a particular shape against the sky that she had decided she was not done looking at. Cole's posting kept him in the territory. They had, as he had suggested, not done this alone. Their partnership was exactly what the word implied in its best sense. Two people who brought different skills to shared work and trusted each other with the parts neither of them could manage independently. She handled the financial and organizational work, the record-keeping, the construction of coherent cases from documentary evidence. He handled the operational work, the investigation, the reading of physical terrain and human threat. Each made the other more effective. They also, as time permitted, made each other happy. This was not a thing either of them had much experience with, and they approached it with the same careful, patient methodology they brought to their professional work, which was not, they discovered, the worst approach. They married in the spring in a ceremony conducted by Judge Morrow, which had the pleasing quality of an appropriate symmetry. Cora was there. Sutton was there. Sam, who was now 15 and considerably less thin than when Lily had first seen him, was there with the serious attention he brought to everything real. Lily wore a deep green dress that she had chosen herself. There was no veil. "Are you nervous?" Cole asked just before the ceremony. "No," she said. "You?" "Yes," he said, with the honesty she had come to expect from him on the things that mattered. "But I have found that doing things while nervous is not significantly different from doing them while calm. The outcome depends on the preparation, not the feeling." "That is a very Pinkerton way to think about a wedding," she said. "It is the only frame I have." She took his hand. "It is sufficient," she said. The land she had bought produced nothing in the first year, except a great deal of work and the beginning of an understanding of what it meant to be responsible for something living. In the second year, with help from a neighboring rancher named Ruth Hendricks, a widow who had run her own property for 15 years and had opinions about soil and weather that proved to be correct, the land began to respond. By the third year, it had become a ranch. It was not large. It was not in any objective sense remarkable. But it was hers, theirs, built with work and money she had earned through skills she had developed in the hardest circumstances she could have imagined, in the service of the truest things she had done. She thought sometimes about the girl she had been. Standing in the Leon silk in the house on Nob Hill, watching the rain run down the window glass, knowing she was about to become property. That girl had climbed out a window into a storm. She had run, which was the right thing, and then she had stopped running, which was also the right thing. The difference between those two acts was the difference between escape and arrival, and the thing she had arrived at was exactly this. On a clear morning in the fourth year, she stood on the ridge above the ranch and looked out over the valley below. The land stretched south in the particular golden brown of late autumn Wyoming, the mountains visible in three directions, the sky that specific blue that she had decided was her favorite color, without ever having had a favorite color before. Cole came up behind her and stood beside her, looking at the same view. "I was thinking," he said. "Yes. There is a case in Montana, complex financial fraud. The agency has been trying to build the documentation for 8 months and getting nowhere." A pause. "I thought you might be interested." She looked at him. He looked back. "How complex?" she said. "Very." "How well documented is the existing evidence?" "Insufficiently." She turned back to the view. She thought about the letter that had arrived 3 years ago, forwarded through 3 addresses. "Come east. Be brave. Ask for the man called Hargrove." She thought about what she had found when she asked. "I will need to review what the agency has before I commit," she said. "Of course. And we will need to be back before December. The weather in that valley..." "Go." "I know the weather." She looked at him again. He was watching her with that expression, the one she had learned in a jail cell, in a mall, in a judge's office, in a boarding house kitchen, the one that had been provisional at first and was not provisional any longer. "Yes," she said, "I am interested." He nodded as though this was what he had expected, which it was. "Sutton will send the files," he said. "I told him you would want the originals, not copies." "You told him before you asked me." "I told him you would want the originals," he clarified. "I did not tell him yes." She considered this distinction. "That is a reasonable use of confidence," she said. "I thought so." The wind moved through the grass below them. A hawk circled over the south pasture, riding the thermal with the particular effortless precision of something built for exactly what it was doing. Lily Shen Hargrove stood on a ridge in Wyoming and looked at the land she had built and the man she had chosen and the life that had grown in the space where a different life had been destroyed. And she thought about her father at his desk in San Francisco, building his careful case in silence, hoping that someone would finish it. She had finished it. She had also in the process begun something entirely her own. She thought about the wedding veil burning in the fireplace grate, the drop from the window, the running. She thought about how far she had run and where she had arrived and the profound difference between those two things. "Montana," she said. "Montana," Cole confirmed. She looked at him one more time with the direct, steady attention that she had brought to every true thing in her life. Then let us go, she said. They walked back down the ridge together toward the ranch below, where the work of a life they had built was waiting, and behind them the mountains stood in the cold, clear air of a Wyoming morning, ancient and indifferent, and beautiful witnesses to nothing and to everything. Lily did not look back. She had learned in the end that looking back was for people who had not decided yet. She had decided. She walked forward into the morning with her husband beside her and her father's pocket watch ticking in her pocket and the future ahead of her wide and honest and entirely irrevocably hers.